I would like to ask you, so what is the typical mindset of a CISO?
You need to have those exclamation marks going on in your head all the time. What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? Yeah. At the same time, if something you hear about something new technology or maybe a new threat or maybe a new breach, in the media, you should be having those exclamation marks in your head, saying, "Well, how did it happen? How did it work?" If you have those going on in your head, I think you get the answer there.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you to the series of the Cybersecurity and the Privacy Show. In this journey, we'll take you through various topics and the dimensions of cybersecurity and privacy. And we start today with the first episode with a very dynamic and an enterprising CISO, Mr. Bittal Bhardwaj, who's a CISO GMR. And let us walk you through as to how a life of a CISO typically is, what challenges do they face, how do they visualize cybersecurity domain, how do they see the national ecosystem of cybersecurity growing up, and what is a typical day or a mindset of a CISO. With this, let me now welcome our CISO, the man, Mr. Bittal Bhardwaj. Let me introduce one more aspect about him to all of you. A graduate, I think, from Pune Engineering College, starting his journey from as a software engineer to application tester, working in G, and finally, I think, being now the CISO GMR, which is a great responsibility. So while he's walked this journey all this way through and is sitting at the helm of the affairs when it comes to cybersecurity, especially in the sector, which is, I would say, full with a lot of challenges and opportunities as well, let's understand as to how his life has been as a CISO GMR. So welcome once again, Mr. Bittal.
Thank you, Vineet, for having me on the show.
Great, lovely. I just want to understand one thing from you, that with this journey that you have started, what actually made you move towards cybersecurity?
Very interesting question. I have been working on IT infrastructure in the performance engineering space in my first half of my career. And it was very operational in nature. And I was looking for something very strategic. And I asked my boss, do you have a role in something which is strategic? He said, well, I have something in application security. And when I came in and did my first role, that's when I realized, the very fundamental of security was missing in the way it was being managed in the industry at that point in time. We'll touch on that more as we go along today.
Lovely. So I want to ask some fundamental questions. What do you think in a life of a CISO that one is maybe aspiring to become a CISO, but are there some basic ingredients, some skill and education that one should keep empowering himself or herself with to aspire to become a CISO one day?
I think a wonderful question, Vineet. I think I see the education, qualification, certification as a point in time, a learning experience. But when you're talking about an aspiring CISO, you have to be very continuous, very fluid in terms of your learning. So it cannot be a point in time. I think the ingredient which you need to become a CISO at one day, I think the way I say it is, you need to have two exclamation marks. The number one, what am I missing? Yeah. And at the same time, oh, this is how it worked. If you have a lot of ahas for these two exclamation marks in your life, I think you're fit to be a CISO one day.
That's a wonderful, I would say, description about it. And if I may ask that, while you were progressing ahead in your journey, starting as a software engineer, I think then you worked with Genpact also, if I'm not wrong.
So I've spent close to 18, 19 years in the GE ecosystem. Okay. So I was consultant initially through Satyam, now it's TechM. And then I've spent time with Jekis. Jekis was sold off, became Genpact. Okay. Then I moved to GE Corporates. Then I had a stint of around 13 and a half years in General Electric in the corporate role there.
Lovely. So what I wanted to ask you, my next question is, which comes to my mind, that in this long journey of your career, starting from the software engineer after engineering, what has been your journey? And in that journey, while you would have seen your seniors and other professionals handling the security and handling the challenges of security, what is that point in your career when you thought that you are prepared mentally to take on the role as a CISO of any big organization?
Wonderful question, Vineet. You're never prepared for anything. Only when it comes, the situation makes the heroes, I guess. But if I go back into my memory, my first role was for an application security leader. At that point in time, I had no experience as a security professional, and I was asked to lead a team of cybersecurity and application security leaders, fairly seasoned, matured, and experienced professionals. and I had no idea about security at that point in time. I'm talking about 15, 16 years back. However, the role was given to me with one simple objective. We said, well, for these, we had around 15,000 developers. And the problem statement given to me was in simple English. It is, well, we pay to these developers to develop code for us. Then we pay them again to test it for us. And then we pay them again to fix the vulnerabilities in the code for us. Please reduce the number of vulnerabilities in the code which we receive from the development teams. It was simple, plain English, in a business terms. I worked upon that. And I started working, as I started working in this role, I realized that the so-called experts in cybersecurity, they were so caught up in the technical aspects of the role that they were fairly far off from the ground reality of what was the purpose, what was the business objective. And I started working on that. And then I realized that if you stick to the fundamentals, why you're doing something, it's an interesting space to be in. So after doing that stint for 3 years, we had a tremendous success. I was able to bring down the number of vulnerabilities in the code by 98%.
Wonderful.
And that all of that is without knowing the security technologies. But I picked up fairly quickly. So from application security, I moved to information security and then to the governance and risk. And I think as I did the whole thing, I realized that, well, if you stick to the business objective of what you're trying to do in the role, that's all you need. And then I took my first role as a CISO for Sub-Saharan Africa 10 years back. And from there on, from Africa, I took on a role for South Asia, then for Greater China. Then I picked up all the regions for the previous company I was working for. It has been a progressive journey from there on. Throughout the career, it's always been about sticking to what is the business purpose of what you're trying to do in the role and not get lost in the technology. Technology is very, very important, right? But that is not the end. The means to the end is fundamentally what are you trying to achieve there.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that would be a great insight for all security professionals. And in the meantime, I would like to also put in the frame that if you have to identify the key pockets of technology enablement for a person to be able to handle the role of CISO professionally, competently, to meet the business objectives, what are those islands of skill sets that you would want or you would recommend the budding professionals who maybe aspire to become CISOs in their times to come?
I'll draw in my own experience there, Vineet. It's important that you understand the tech landscape fairly well, and it all starts from the IT infrastructure. You need to understand how the infrastructure is designed, architected, how does it work, the elements of that architecture from the application standpoint. Once you understand the fundamentals of how technology works, it's that much easier for you to secure it. So CISO should fundamentally have a IT or digital background. You may not be master of everything, but you should be able to connect the dots fairly seamlessly. Now, beyond that, to be able to have a flair to communicate with your management, understanding the business objectives, being able to translate that into the strategy and the actionables for the organization. I think those are key ingredients for a CISO to be successful in a particular role. If I also say that security function by very nature will not have enough people, right? So it works on the principle of how much are you able to influence the organization. Yeah. Yep. So you need to wear the business sales hat at the same time while you're taking care of your responsibilities. And driving by influence goes along with how you become a CISO.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think with this gives me a thought on asking you about, you mentioned about addressing the business objectives. So as a cyber security specialist and a CISO, how do you facilitate the business engagement, the leadership in any organization? What would you recommend for the other CISO now, or what is your strategy when you approach it?
I think the number one thing, you need to establish yourself amongst the management of the organization, which fundamentally means you need to have a seat at the table. It's easy said than done, but if the management, in today's context, management of any organization, they're fairly aware of the need of cybersecurity in an organization. So you need to have a seat at the table at the management. That's number one. Number two, you have to wear a sales hat. half the time and look for the opportunities where you can go in and building the relationships with every stakeholder. So slightest of the opportunity, you have to go out there. I give you an example. You may get a call from CFO or maybe a chief legal officer that, well, I'm not able to access my USB. Well, IT guys can take care of that. But that's an opportunity for you to go and have an audience and explain them about the whole thing. So wearing a sales hat and having a seat at the table is how you typically drive it. Then obviously there are formal structures in any organization. You make sure that whenever you have the spotlight in those meetings, be it a board meeting or be it any governance meetings, you are able to articulate what you're doing as a security organization so that it's fairly comprehensible or comprehensible by the respective stakeholders in the organization.
So do you find some challenges while you approach the business leadership in your role as a CISO?
I have not found a challenge there because I believe I can speak the language they understand.
Wonderful.
You have to simplify what you're trying to communicate. If you talk in the technical terms, it might not make a lot of sense for them. Give an example. A few years back, we were talking with our CFO, and I went to him, boss, we want to move from AV to EDR, right? And once the conversation was over, he was like, oh, so you're talking about, so from a signature based, you're moving to behavior based. So you have to simplify the technology for them. Management of any company is fairly mature. They understand the risk part very, very well, as long as you speak in the language they understand.
Wonderful. I think that's a very, very well said point, and I think what is simple is easy to buy also.
Yes.
In any case. Moving forward, I just would like to ask you, so what is the typical mindset of a CISO?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. You need to have those exclamation marks going on in your head all the time. What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? Yeah. At the same time, if something you hear about something, new technology, or maybe a new threat, or maybe a new breach, in the media, you should be having those exclamation marks in your head, saying, "Well, how did it happen? How did it work?" If you have those going on in your head, I think you get the answer there.
And with all these security challenges coming up every now and then in the news, what's a typical day of a CISO like, Bithal Bhardwaj?
Well, that's so for a CISO, no 2 days are similar.
Okay.
Okay, you are driven by what is happening at that point in time, because the point in time comes in where you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to be there with the boys to address a particular situation. At the same time, you have to make sure that you are networking well within the organization and outside the organization as well. So on a typical day, I will be meeting up with internal stakeholders. I'll be meeting up with external stakeholders, maybe in my office. Maybe I'm not stepping out, right? But that interaction is very important. It's always a flavor of the day, meeting up somebody new. There is a regular governance rhythm which goes in. So typically day starts with understanding, well, how did the night go and what are we planning? So typically, Vineet, a day is, as I said, you have to network. So either it's networking or you're governing, you're collaborating, or you are motivating or inspiring your teams. Because the business which we are in, it is about finding that one needle in the haystack. And it's not easy when a SOC analyst is looking at hundreds of alerts, right? So you get a fatigue there. It's very important that you spend time with the boys in the team. You inspire them, you aspire them so that they're ready. If you inspire them enough, then half the job is done automatically. Empowering the team is another very important element of how a day would typically look like for you.
Wonderful. And that also brings me to a question which I would like to ask you. It's said that a man who doesn't read is no better than a man who cannot read.
Yeah.
So in this entire day of networking, aspiring team, when is that time slot, and what do you like to read, and when do you read?
Well, as you know, in my free time, I'm more of an artist, right?
Oh.
Yeah, which means I love to go into the details. And when you are an artist, you are going into the details of, well, how do I make something exactly same copy on my paper? So reading, I don't have time today to read a book. I get to read a book once in a month. But what keeps me updated is the Twitter. So I follow top 200 cybersecurity influencers. So the feed in Twitter helps me a lot. Feed in LinkedIn helps me a lot
Oh,
to
lovely.
keep an eye on what's going on. And you get a topic which intrigues you, and then you go in deeper to understand. Oh, this is what they're talking about. Books. The last book I read was authored by a friend, Amit Dubey. I forgot the name of the book, but it's a fantastic fiction, sci-fi. It talks about cybersecurity risks. So something like that comes my way. I definitely try to read that while I'm taking a flight once in a
Wonderful,
month.
wonderful.
Yeah,
No, I
yeah.
think we have the recipe of being an efficient and a competent CISO. That is to follow Twitter feeds,
Yeah,
follow top LinkedIn, I would say, news feeds and
yeah.
handles, and maybe one occasionally, I would say, rather refreshing up yourself by doing some art. So
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the secret recipe and the sauce of how to do well as a CISO. Well, with this, I also would like to just say something about as to over the years that now you have been into security. How has the role of CISO evolved?
It's a very interesting question. One thing which has gone down in terms of where CISOs used to spend time is trying to create the awareness and the need for cybersecurity in the organization. Media has done a fantastic job. The organizations like DSCI has done a fantastic job there. So we don't spend as much time on why cyber is important. If you look at 10 years back, if there is half an hour for a presentation to the management, you'll spend 15 minutes. What is cybersecurity? Why it is so important? That's one element which has simplified significantly. Second thing, the business engagements have gone significantly up. So you are hearing the use cases from the stakeholders directly. Earlier, it was not the case. Today, because everybody is so well versed with digital, because thanks to media, so you do get a lot of questions which makes you ponder and think over, oh, how do I enable him to do the job? So I think those are two elements which have changed. Technology, I would say, has evolved as well. The arsenal of for a CISO has undergone significant shift. In last 3 years, the machine learning has taken the center stage of every tool you have in your arsenal. That was not the case 3 years back. So today is all about the anomaly detection. Earlier, it's all signature based. So I think the maturity in the tools, number one. Number two, the amount of time you would spend on the awareness of your management. And number three, you are directly interacting with the businesses and you're getting the pulse on the ground. And that keeps you, I would say, alert in terms of what changes you have to make in your cyber strategy so that you are an enabler for the business, really.
Wonderful. There's so much insights into the processes, tools, business, and evolving technology domains. What I would like to also give your thoughts on with these like National COE, which is the joint initiative of DSCI and METI,
Right.
where the cybersecurity technology development and entrepreneurship is encouraged. For the entrepreneurs who are working in the cybersecurity domains and they wish to rise to become global cybersecurity innovators, uh, how do you recommend that they get a hang of the use cases which you mentioned about in between, identification of use cases, so that they directly get the hang of those use cases using which or the platform that we can create for them, so that their focus and attention is on developing products which are actually meaningful and useful to the cybersecurity ecosystem, which is already, I would say, cluttered up with a lot of security solutions already.
Right, right. I think great question. Every startup starts with a wonderful idea. What is very important that each startup should actually have one or two, not more than that, right anchor customers. May not be in commercial terms, but you need to have that anchor sponsor for your product. Only when you have tested out your product in the environment, in the real environment, is when you will be able to make your idea turn into a reality. Otherwise, the great academic ideas remains wonderful on paper or to fail later point in time. So number one, make sure that you find that anchor sponsor for your product. It has to be the closest fit of the problem statement you're trying to solve. Often I have seen the startup entrepreneur is stuck up with the idea he or she has. They believe this is the right way to solve the problem, but the focus is not as much on what the problem you're trying to solve. And I have seen quite a few of these companies, they're trying to sell their solution rather than solving the problem. So I think that is one element. Second, I would say that the startup guys typically, by very nature, are techies. That's why it's a startup, right? You're a techie. You get a
Correct.
beautiful idea, and you have the magical power to convert that idea into a tech product. But how do you go about socializing that what the product is? How do you go about socializing or marketing that product? Is another skill. A lot of newbies in that space, I've seen them struggling when it comes to how do you go about making sure that your product starts getting recognized in the market.
So, picking up the clue from what you said, that the socializing of the problem statement,
Right.
and actually identifying what is the problem. So, while we see that startups become a challenge, but with your experience, what would you recommend is the right check and balance to do in between, or when you're starting up? How do you recommend them validating the problem statement that they're solving, so that the time and effort, the money, is actually put in the right direction with the right amount of focus?
I think the answer for that question lies in the very objective of National COE, right? Uh, an organization like National COE is actually solving the very same problem by incubating all of these ideas and curating these ideas, these startups, right, to a point where you help them succeed. I think it's important that don't work in silos. Get yourself associated with either an organization like National COE, or maybe there are a lot of corporates also have a very similar incubation environment. Get aligned there, and then you just take all the help available to you. Don't try to build your product in silos or the services in silos. That is what I think the key would be.
Yeah, I think that's a great great insight. In fact, that leads me to an idea maybe that there's a need of I think collaboration is the way ahead,
Right.
and there's a need for organizations like National COE, DSCI to maybe collaborate with such other domain corporate, I would say, startup initiatives where they are trying to nurture the ecosystem.
Right.
Because ultimately the aim is to have a stronger national cybersecurity ecosystem. I think that's the whole focus.
No, in
And,
fact, Vineet, so when we have to buy a product, the first call for my office goes to DSCI,
wonderful.
asking them, can you recommend some Indian startups in this space for the way that we're looking for product? And this is what we have done for past 2 years. So opportunities will come to DSCI and National COE or such organizations. So that's why it's very important to be part of the ecosystem.
So that I would like to ask you, by feeling myself as a startup for a moment, and to identify that if I am a startup and I have to approach CISO GMR, who leads the security in the aviation sector wonderfully well and efficiently well, where would I find, I would say, my questionnaire, the exam questionnaire, which I would want to solve myself? How do I get that use case questionnaire or that bank of the use cases?
Number one, once you're able to spend some time with, say, me or my team, if you approach me as a vendor, you may not get the attention or will not be open. That is a hard fact, right? Try to leverage the platforms which are available where we can have those, I would say, free-flowing conversations. We're more than happy to share in those such forums. If you approach us that, well, you want to sell your product, well, we know it's a new product. Why would I invest? Why would I risk my own posture,
Correct.
right? So most of the conversations die there itself.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you approach me saying, well, I have a product and I want to make it very aviation specific, we will have a meaningful dialogue basis that. That's a way to go about that.
So I would rather take a step back and say that when the ideas are mooting up, when the tech enthusiasts are trying to build a solution,
Yep.
and they believe that they have got capability to solve cybersecurity problems, and if they are the ones who are I would say the niche entrants who don't have a product but they have ideas in this thing, how can the aviation sector facilitate them to tell them the problem areas which they can pick up to actually start solving them in conjunction and in by guidance or by getting adequate, well mentored from the sector, because so that the effort which they put has a meaningful outcome for the sector which they are trying to address.
I think it's a beautiful question, Vineet. We're trying to incubate such collaborations. Very shortly, we are launching a pad. When I say pad, it's going to be a experience center where we've actually built one in Hyderabad. It's a digital simulation lab on a 20 feet by 7 feet table. We are building exactly same thing in Delhi now. The idea is that we want to invite these companies to have the dialogues and spark some conversations there. If you approach me from the perspective of, well, let me have access to this simulation environment, I'm more than happy to hear your ideas in terms of how can you help secure that environment. Again, a big no-no, don't approach as a vendor. But if you want to collaborate, we are building something like that in Delhi. Next 4 months is going to be launched. Please come over there. And it's going to be for the collaboration for the sector. And Vineet, as we were talking offline, let's build something.
Yeah, sure. I think this ecosystem of so many startups that the DSCI National COE has, I'm sure there's a long way to go ahead and contribute to the cause of taking security ahead.
Right.
Wonderful. So after a small break, let me welcome once again the man of the day, that is Mr. Bittal Bhardwaj, CISO GMR. And I'd like to just take the discussion forward to ask you straight away with a new, I would say, round of coffee. That is, what are the 3 or 4 challenges that you have faced as CISO that you'd like to share with the audience?
So, Vineet, before we went for a break, we spoke about the uncertainty and the unknowns you have to deal with. That's the number 1 challenge. I think number 2 challenge is finding the right skill set in the industry. A lot of technology which we're talking about today, they're not very old. AI or generative AI, all of these, or data sciences, that has become mainstream now in the products which we use, right? So finding the right skills in the market has been a challenge. Also finding a lot of skill set from a fresher standpoint has been a challenge as well. And I think the third and the last most common challenge is how can I have those magic eyes so that I know who is changing what in the organization, because every time a change happens in the organization at no matter what level, it translates into some sort of a cyber risk. So having those godly eyes in the environment, not having the godly eyes, is another challenge. I would put it that way.
Okay. So this talent, I think, has been a buzzword. Talent hunting, talent challenge has been, I think, the buzzword in the security industry. And so what is your approach in, I would say, identifying or hiring the talent, which is the right skill mix of what you would need in your industry?
The approach which we take as an organization is we do take a lot of interns. We build a comprehensive hands-on learning program. So once the intern or a trainee joins in, he or she has to undergo 2 months of that rigorous training program. It's done in such a way that there is a mentor against each one of the new trainee or intern whose objective is, how do I make sure that this person is as good as me in next 2 months. That's one way we have approached. We haven't come across a university or a college where, and even if it's a security focused university or a college, where you can actually deploy a resource from day one.
Okay.
Yeah, so we haven't come across that. But I've also heard there are a lot of programs in the industry today where a lot of CISOs are supporting to help build this talent in cybersecurity. We also try to tap into those programs as an organization as well.
Wonderful. I think there I see an opportunity where with an expert like you or an industry like you, maybe there's a need to identify as to what should be the change in the syllabus of the universities or the institutes which are teaching cybersecurity, so that the students coming out from there are effective from day one of there.
No, I think it's not about the theory you're going to teach. I think it's the hands-on experience. I would say we have to bring in more of a knowledge transfer approach, which means only a practitioner can ensure that the student is able to comprehend what skill is required in the workplace. So more than the teaching, it should be more about knowledge transfer from a practitioner to be a to the to be practitioner. That's what has to come in.
So, do you think that taking a cue from this, do you think that actually the universities, while it's important to lay down fundamentals and bring up the skills to a certain level before you actually get into practitioner mode, do you think that the last semester of the university programs or these education programs can actually be concentrated or focused towards hands-on experience in the industry, or have their labs culled out in a manner, curated in a manner which helps them gain hands-on experience on things which are required by the industry?
Oh, I think that is must. The typically in engineering, the eighth semester should be focused just on this industry interaction. A lot of universities today send their students out for the internships. Uh, so which means there is no one concentrated effort towards making sure that everybody from that college for that particular semester is learning. This is where I think opportunity lies, where industry has to come forward and work very closely with academia to solve their own talent shortage problem.
Wonderful. So, on behalf of the academia that we also interact with, may I ask, take the liberty of asking you that if a student or an engineering college is keen on making sure that the students in the domain of cybersecurity get the right platform, how should they approach GMR or Bittal Bhardwaj's ecosystem to make sure that they get that right opportunity to practice security while they are in their final semesters or some advanced stages of their learning curve?
We typically get the interns and trainings from certain universities in India. Uh, However, as and when we get the recommendations from or the direct contacts from the students that they are interested, we definitely look at those profiles as well. Uh, we don't generally publish these roles out, uh, but if you're interested to do internship with us, please reach out to our HR teams directly.
Lovely, lovely. I think that way we would like to take this initiative forward because of a lot of academia connect that the national COE builds and maybe sees that how these opportunities can be created to build up the stronger ecosystem for the nation as such.
Right. We have a MOU with National Forensic Science University, so we take a lot of interns from there.
Wonderful.
So if you have more colleges in your ecosystem who you think are focusing on cybersecurity, happy to talk and work with them.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that's this is brings some kind of a very, very promising, I think, future ahead for the students and for the audience who could watch this particular reply of yours. I think that that's a look quite promising for
We
them.
look forward for that.
Yeah, wonderful. Tell me something about how do you manage your time
Well,
in this busy schedule? How do you manage time to manage your professional front or your personal front?
somebody rightly said, a busy man is the man who's got time for everything.
Wonderful.
Right. So it does become a challenge at point in time with that approach, but I've been able to find time for everything as long as you're flexible. And I'm saying that without going my personal and work life off balance. So there are a lot of things which you can do while coming to office, while going back home, in the evenings, over the work. So you have to find time for everything.
With all these challenges of finding and struggling with time, I'm sure time becomes a premium when there is an incident
Yes.
that may happen.
Right.
And moving on from that little lighter to a little heavy note of challenge of the time, what has been, how have you handled the incident response, and how would you, give a lesson for the other CISOs who may be watching this?
You may have invested significantly in the protection and the defense technologies, but when stuff hits the fan, how you respond to that is what matters. In my experience, how quickly you are able to assemble your teams, the right skills, and how well you are able to engage your management and your external stakeholders and the tech teams. That response time, I think, is what wins the day for you. Uh, Tech definitely has a role to play, but end of the day is the ability. I've seen in the situations where people have become heroes. Without quoting the full incident, there was a situation a while back, and we had one intern who had been working with us for past 4 months, and we've been struggling. How do we make sure that he takes a bigger role and all of those? How does he settle in the role? And that situation happened, and over the weekend, and when I met him on the Monday morning, and we had to push him back to go back home because he assumed the responsibility and he took the responsibility and role to contain that situation over the weekend that he did not go home. And from intern to that mature person, a professional, it just took one incident, one situation. So I believe it's all about the men and the people you have. Tech definitely is required, but how quickly you can assemble, how quickly you can respond, that's a way for you to go about it. Yeah, and don't keep anybody in dark as you go along the whole thing.
Lovely. And this also brings me a thought that in this entire crisis management plan that any organization would prepare or any CISO would make sure that it is there on the charts and the slides. Have you noticed any gap in how we actually envisage a plan and when it came to actually acting upon it? Would like to share some experience and as to how can one bridge up those gaps for again a better response?
No, it's a continuous learning exercise. You may have a wonderful SOP and a plan, but when the situation happens, you're not referring to that again and again, right? You're responding to the situation at that point in time. I believe once the situation is over, you have to go back and see how can I further improvise on what I have documented. So there's certain elements which have to be followed strictly, but a lot of other elements you just are responding to the situations. So, but go back once the things are normalizes. Go back and then make sure that you document those learnings because that will help the next situation to be handled in a much better way.
So if you may like to share it in whatever form, what are those key 5 points that one should anybody should address while preparing a crisis management, which are practical from your practical learnings? Some attributes or some points of highlight that should be part of your crisis management plan.
I think number one, what is crisis? You should know when to call a crisis very well. And that's where a lot of unknowns are there. This is very subjective at the same time. So what qualifies for crisis is the number one, you need to have it. You need to have the stakeholders very clearly mapped out, defined. Internal, external, management, tech, all of that matrix should be defined. You need to have the roles of each of those very articulately defined in that crisis management plan. Beyond that, I'll not go into the different use cases which you will play out. But beyond that, what you'll have to do is you need to also define the mechanism of how this whole thing would be orchestrated in case of a situation. That's also fairly important. Lastly, and most importantly, you have to train every single stakeholder you have defined. If you haven't trained, if you haven't told them that you might get a phone call, and when you get a phone call, this is what you have to do, then that crisis management plan is of no use. So I think those are 3 or 4 elements I would think should be there.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that would definitely give some kind of an experience exposure to others who would be watching this, and a great clue from that. So in the life of the CISO that you have been living, I'm sure you must be observing what all is happening around the ecosystem, both at the international level and the national level. I would want you to make us some recommendations and suggestions for all of us here to say that how do you see the national cybersecurity ecosystem growing, and what are your key recommendations to make it grow further?
All the right things are happening in India right now. We have a data protection bill coming up. I hear that the national cybersecurity strategy is being worked upon. We see the initiatives like National COE, which is incubating a large ecosystem of startups in India. I think it's a wonderful time for India to actually further strengthen its posture. I've also seen that in terms of the talent, as a nation, we are only right next to US when in terms of the talent availability, right? I think we strongly positioned right now to make an impact. I'm trying to do that in my small world of aviation. How can we put Indian cybersecurity approach in the aviation sector globally? And I believe overall as a nation as well, we're fairly well poised to take the center stage in this direction.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for all your responses. I'm sure it was a great insight for me. I'm sure it would be a lot of insight and getting to know right directly from your heart, and the way you articulated it, I'm sure people would actually benefit from your experiences, and not many would get this opportunity to interact with you directly and do a heart-to-heart talk and get the insights into various facets of the security and technology and how to nurture this cybersecurity ecosystem. We are very grateful, and on behalf of Mr. Vinayak Godse, CEO DSCI, I once again thank you for coming here and sparing your valuable time to interact and share your experience with the wider audience that you would reach out to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vineet, and you've been an exceptional host here, and it's a beautiful facility you have in Noida. Thank you again.
Thank you once again. Looking forward to interact with you more and collaborate more.
Same
Thank
here.
you very much. Yeah, thank you.